Okay, what we're going to do in this lab or in this video is I'm just going to go over the basic logic you're looking at. A lot of this is repetitive, how to pass variables along, and I'm just going to cover some of the highlights of what you need to know to complete this lab. Excuse me. So on this one, what you're going to do is your first page is going to come up that allows a user to search by email. Now, email is unique in your database, so that should be fine. So you type in an email address, the user clicks login, and assuming that they're using a non-MVC approach, if you want to use MVC approach, highly encourage it. But if you're still trying to get the basics down, go with a non-MVC approach. So when they click login, what you're going to do is you're going to pass this email. You're going to receive it on the next page. It's going to search the database and retrieve the customer information for that email, which will allow you to display the customer's name here. The other thing you have to do on this page is you have to populate this drop-down list using the data in the database. And so what you're going to do is you're going to grab all of the products out of the product database, and you're going to loop through them and make them appear in this drop-down list. So once the user has their username and behind the scenes their customer ID selected, they'll select something from this list. We'll pass those two options onto the next page that will actually insert the information into the database. So you'll insert the customer's ID, you'll insert the product ID, and then we'll also create the current date and insert that into the database, into the registrations table. And then finally, what you'll do is you'll provide a little message here that shows up that says that the product, and you'll put the product number in there, was registered successfully. So that's the overview of what the application does. Now let me switch over to a document that I've prepared here to highlight some of the things that you need to know for this assignment. And I will put this up in Blackboard when I'm finished with it, but it's really just snippets of code this time. So the generic logic for this lab is the customer login page shows up, they enter an email address. So in the non-MVC approach, this is on index.php, and that form where they enter the email address is going to call another page. So we're going to call that the register form.php. So that is sent to a query at the top of register form.php that will just select all from the customer table where the emails match up, just like you did on the previous lab. So that's nothing new there. The other thing you'll need to do is you'll need to do a query to another query to the database that grabs all of the products from the table and then loops through them, writing the HTML as you go. And I'll show you that code in a minute. So once those two things are accomplished using the non-MVC approach, the customer ID that was selected with that email address and which product was selected will then be sent to a third page named productregister.php. And I'll show you how to get which product was selected as well. So on that page, you'll create a current date. I'll show you that. We've done it previously, but we'll do it again. So you'll create a variable that stores the current date. You'll receive the customer ID and the selected product ID from the previous page. Let me get rid of my mom's calling, so let me turn that off. So the customer ID, the selected ID will come from the previous page. We'll create the current date variable here, and then we'll write an insert query using those three fields, and that is going to be written into the registrations table, and those are the fields that you need for the registration field. If you want to take a peek at it in your MySQL, you can do that. And then the last thing you have to do is you have to show that message. Now you already have the product ID right here. You used it for the insert, so then really all you need to do is use that as output to let the user know that they have created something. So let's look at some of the code that you'll need. I've made up my titles database again, but it's very similar to what you'll do on this. So here's the code to populate a list. So I'm going to start with the query first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the select all of the fields from my table named titles, and I'm going to order them by a field named book title. And what this does is it puts the fields that I'm going to display in my drop-down list in alphabetical order. So if you had something like select all from states, order by state, then that would show Alabama to Wyoming, assuming there's nothing before Alabama. But then this is normal. We have our statement, we prepare our query, we execute it. We're fetching all because we're grabbing all of the titles in this database, and you'll be grabbing all of the products from the product table. And so what that does is that creates a record set for us. So we have sitting here in storage right now in something called titles. Each record we can retrieve from the title database. And so to show them in our drop-down list, we do kind of a combination of HTML and PHP like we've done in the past. So the label for my field is going to be choose a title. That's instructions that'll show up on the form telling the user what to do. We're going to use a select structure, which is the HTML for a drop-down menu. The name we're going to give it is title, and just like on your text input, you need to pay attention to what you choose here because, again, that's how we're going to tell what was actually selected from this. So the structure for a select is that each thing that shows up in the list is inside an opening and closing option tag, and that option tag generally uses two attributes. The value tag, I'm sorry, not two attributes. It uses one attribute and then what appears to the user. So we can hide a value behind the scenes that the user will never see, and then we can show the user something completely different. So again, pretend like we had a list of states in a drop-down menu. We might spell out the word Mississippi and have the whole word show up in our drop-down list, but behind the scenes, what we'll use as our data point or what we might eventually write to the database, we can change that to just MS. And so that's what's happening here is we're going to have a for each loop. We're going to say for each individual title that shows up in our titles array or record set, we're going to loop through and populate this drop-down list until we run out of titles, or in the case of our lab, until we hit the last product. And so what this does is the first record comes in, it grabs the title information for that single title, and it sets up the HTML option, and then we're going to echo into the value attribute our book ID. And we don't want the user to have to choose a title based on what its ISBN is. We probably would allow them to look at the title and select it. But for our purposes, what we want to pass along is the actual book ID. So in this case, in your case, the customer will see the name of the product, but what we're going to pass along is the product code. So this right here, the value attribute gets populated, and that right there is a hidden field from the user. They don't see that in the drop-down menu. So the option tag, this whole opening and closing option tag occurs. So this one right here, it's a little complicated. This one right here closes the PHP tag. So this whole thing right here from opening to closing, greater than, less than sign, sets up the option. So what appears between the opening and closing option tag is what the user actually sees in the list. So what we do is we echo out what we want the user to see. So here the user sees green eggs and ham, but what gets populated in the value of this option is maybe the ISBN of green eggs and ham. So when the user selects the words green eggs and ham, we have the ability to actually capture a different value associated with that. And so that option closes, and then it just repeats the process until it runs out of titles. So it writes the next option, which will be the next thing in the drop-down list. It'll close the option tag. It'll keep going through it until it runs out of things. So your select here will probably be something like products. You'll have for each product has product. You're going to echo the product code for whichever one you're on currently as you loop through them in the database. But then what you actually want to appear in the drop-down list is the name of the product itself. And that's what populates the whole list until it runs out of records. So the user has the name, you have the customer ID, but you've displayed the user's name, and now you've set up a list for them to choose which product they're going to register. In this case, we're going to register a book. And so what we have to do is we have to determine how we are going to figure out which one they actually selected. And it's pretty easy. What we can do is we can set up a variable. This is after they've clicked submit and we've moved on to our last form that is actually going to write the data to the database. And so we set up a variable just like we always do. We use our filter input, and we can just put an input post of title, which matches up with the name of my select on my form. So whatever value was selected for the title that the user chose, that gets submitted when the form gets submitted, and you can just bring that in here. So for example, if they selected green eggs and ham and I had the ISBN number here, what happens? They click submit and it comes through, the value comes through as that title and gets stored in my new variable name. And I'm going to need that for when I write to my database. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to allow them to register this book only on this day or when they purchased it or whatever. And so what we do is we just set up our own variable and we populate it with the current date. So just use the date function, and then you can specify the format that you want that date stored in. So make sure that that matches up with what's currently in the database for your products. And then you just do a regular query to do an insert query. You're going to insert into the purchases table, and you're going to use the values of customer ID, the book ID, and the date. And so that really just writes the fact that they've written it to the registration. So on your lab, you'll have the selected product, you'll have the current date, and so you're going to insert into registrations the values of customer ID, product ID, and current date, or whatever you decide to call them. And of course you have to come down here and bind these values together just like you did before. So just make sure that they match up, that the placeholder is this item, and then the variable where the data is stored matches up with your variable names where you created them. So this goes through just a normal insert. It closes the cursor, and then the last step you have to do, because you already know what product ID you have, you can just write a line of HTML that says you have registered book number, and then what you'll do is you'll echo out your special care, your HTML special cares of the selected title. In other words, whatever they selected up here, you're just going to echo that back out to let them know that the update happened. So again, to review, what happens is the user enters an email, they click submit, that email gets passed to the next page where a query retrieves the user's name so you can display it here. You populate the drop-down list with all of the products in the database. The user selects one of those from the product and they click register product, which goes to the third page, which creates the current date, grabs which item was selected, grabs the customer ID along the way. You might want to hide that and send it on, so you can do that pretty easily. And then the record is written to the database, and you get a message showing that that product was registered successfully. So I'll go ahead and post these snippets of code in Blackboard in case you want to use those. But pretty much you're going to be redoing quite a few things that you've done in previous labs. The only highlights really are this drop-down list that we've not used before. So good luck and have fun.